Okay, welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to draw Judah. I hope you don't mind I mention your first name.
No, that's fine.
Okay, we're going to start with Judah's cranium. It's pretty much like anyone's cranium. We're going to have to just assume the cranium shape because he's got a lot of hair. We can't really see the form very clearly. Remember, the cranium is two half circles with a space in between. And near the bottom of that space, you're going to find the ear hole. In case anyone's wondering, this is not the Loomis method. This is more of an anatomical method of drawing the head that I teach. I think the Loomis method is useful, but I think it's best to start with a little more solid understanding of the skull. Okay, now we're going to pull the line of the face straight down from the outside of this curve, and we're going to draw the jaw, and we're going to make sure that this distance here to here is about the same as this distance from here to here. I'm going to try to do a little bit of annotation. Maybe not. I think this isn't working right. Just a second. Yeah, no. Okay, I'm just gonna. So what we just did is here's the brow ridge. Can everybody see that? And so the line of the face that we just drew is not. That's not Judah's profile. That's the construction line that we're going to use in order to find his profile. Here's the jaw, here's the ear hole, and here is more or less where if I block it out, this is more or less where the skull would be. And what I was assuming was that this distance from the brow ridge to the bottom of the nose would be the same as this distance from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. You can measure that with your pencil right now and check, but it looks pretty much the same. Would everyone agree with the thinking there? And then we always look for the eye to be centered on the head. So if we look for this distance here and compare it to this distance, those are also very close to being the same. Again, I can't really see the top of his skull. His hair has an admirable amount of volume. So, but if I measure these two, I'm going to say they are also the same. So those proportions do vary on different people, but they don't vary a ton. I would say that this angle here is a little steeper than what I've been teaching for an average, and this is a little shallower. So in other words, the angle of the jaw here is a little bigger than on an average person, but not by much. Okay, so we're going to look for the front of the throat. It's going to be in front of the angle of the jaw, right about here. And notice that the angle of the throat is about 20 to 30 degrees from vertical. But as often happens, he's sitting up straight. The back of his neck is just about straight up and down. The part we can see, you'd see under the collar, you'd see more like the trapezius muscle, creating some fullness back here, but this part is very vertical. And let's go ahead and mark eye level. Eye level is going to be centered on here. Maybe just a little higher. Okay, so that's our basic structure. I'm going to teach you kind of an advanced method today where we're going to we're going to do a block in of the hair and a shadow map before we do the features. So that's something I don't usually teach at this level, but let's go ahead and try it. We've got okay, so the ear hole's right where I said it would be. Notice that his ear lobe in this pose is coming down past his nose. So that's going to come down past the bottom of the cranium a ways. And this tilts up and back. And blocking in art is it's what we've learned how to see angles and distances. If we see a very irregular form like Judah's hair and we try to understand it in terms of straight lines where we can read the angle clearly, we're going to do a much better job than if we try to understand it in terms of all these irregular forms. See, by simplifying this, see how this line is parallel to this line? That's a useful little thing to observe. This line is sloping back around about the same amount as this is sloping forward. So let's try to draw this shape. And let's try to relate it to the shape of the face. Most people, I really want you to pay attention here today. This is the whole face. Look how small that area is compared to this area. Right? So try to get that relationship right. So here's the face. The hair is coming way up. The hair comes way out in front like that. Here's this slope down, and then we slope back towards the neck. I have to zoom out just a little so you can see this. Then we go up over the ear and up along above the cheekbone. And I'm going to do a first shading on the hair because his hair is dark. And that's going to help me see, once I have a value in here, remember if you're right-handed, you're going the other direction. Once I have a value in here, I can start to see that, yeah, this is about the right relationship between this hair and this face. And like I said, I'm even going to do a block in of the shadow map of the face. Okay, let me get rid of some of this. Okay. So, see, and this is a very, not the way that people without training would ever approach this. Like, I'm going to do this shadow shape, and remember, when we're not trying to understand this form yet, we're just drawing this shadow shape the way we would drop a map of Norway or something. Like some form that we're not familiar with. So we're going to have a shadow shape here, a shadow shape here, and a shadow shape here. And we're going to try to copy these angles. And I'm going to come around and check your work in just a second, so try to be caught up. So see what I'm doing? I'm relating this big shape of dark to this smaller shape of dark, and I'm kind of trying to see them all as one shape, and I'm relating their sizes. This is a great way to avoid making any major errors because your brain is really good at recognizing shapes. And if you can see them as shapes of dark before you try to see them as forms, you might avoid some of the common mistakes that people make. And this is what you'll see if you go to an art college and you look at really advanced people drawing. You're going to see them placing these shadow shapes before they start to commit to where the features actually go. So you're basically using a different part of your brain. You're using a part of your brain that's involved in just pattern recognition before you're using the part of your brain that's involved in facial recognition. So if I look quickly back and forth between my drawing and the reference right now, I can see some similarities in pattern that make me feel like I'm on the right track in terms of proportion. And like I said, I'm going to come around right now and check yours. But try to squint a little, stand back a little, and just ask yourself, are these similar patterns or not? So we caught a few errors just now, and I want everyone to really reflect on this for a second. The saddest thing in the world is if you draw a beautiful ear and then you draw a beautiful nose, and then you realize they're too far apart, and you have to like pick which one you're going to erase and redraw. So by sort of starting out with these simple block shapes of shadow and making sure they create the right pattern, we're avoiding all the potential for those really major errors. Okay, I'm going to zoom in now. I'm going to clean up my annotations, and we're going to zoom in on the profile. Okay. So I'll zoom in on my drawing too. Guess that's as close as I can get. Okay. Just make sure. Okay. I'm going to actually lower my camera. Okay, are we ready? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the line of the face back in. I'm coming from this is, a lot of artists actually use plumb lines like fishing weights on pieces of string in order to, and they'll hold that up in front of what they're drawing, because it's a lot easier to get something like a profile right if you are relating it to a nice clean vertical. So we're going to drop that vertical down in our drawings. And try not to tilt it back like I just did. Okay. So we're up here at the brow ridge. We're looking at this angle. This is just like the angle measuring game we were doing. This angle is about inside this triangle is about 30 degrees, I think. And remember the thing about the radius? Every tip of every nose can be considered as a radius. So if we imagine a circle we could fit in here, it's going to be about that big of a circle. You see what I'm doing? So we're going to go ahead and draw that circle, and that's going to give us the amount of curve in his nose. Okay, now I got to put this. Okay. Okay, now we're not coming straight back. We're sloping down a few degrees, and his philtrum comes just about back to the line of his face. Judah has a little more of his nose out in front of his philtrum than behind it. And remember, we're looking for this to be 1/3 of the way between here and here. Is that about what we're seeing? You see how these units are about the same? So mark 1/3 of the way down. Most people make the mouth way too low. They want the mouth to be in the middle. And I actually recently spoke to one of our elementary school teachers who's actually been teaching it that way. Like, you put the mouth halfway between the nose and the chin. That's not correct. We're 1/3 of the way down. Okay. So we curve gently out. We don't want to come out too far and make fish lips. And then we cut back under to meet this line. Then we're coming down at about 45 degrees. And now we have to end up with the chin quite a bit behind the line of the face, so that's sort of like back here. And to check our work, we're going to throw a facial angle in there. And notice that on Judah, the facial angle does not touch the lips at all. And the facial angle is also about 30 degrees. Okay. He's smiling slightly, so that's straightened out the Cupid's bow. So we're just going to go like this. There's still a very soft curve there, like that. And don't come too far back. And we're not going to shade the entire upper lip. Notice there is a shadow here, but it only goes up to about halfway up the upper lip. And there's a little piece of shadow right under the bottom lip. That's very typical in this kind of lighting situation. Okay. One really important thing to measure that most people don't think of measuring is this distance from here to here. Let me show you. See, here's the bottom of the nose, and here's the bottom of the nostril, and here's the top of the nostril. So notice you could fit a whole other nostril in this space between the nostril and the bottom of the nose. And notice that most of his nostril is out in front of his philtrum, but it doesn't go all the way to the tip. Now we're going to place the nostril more accurately if we shadow map the tip of the nose. Like, see, there's that little shadow there. And then we come around here. This is form shadow of the ala, and it merges with the cast shadow of the ala underneath it. We placed that shadow earlier, but just an approximation. Now we're getting in and trying to do it more accurately. And now that this shadow's here, we can have a much better idea of how to place this nostril. It comes a little bit behind the philtrum, and it comes about, I don't know, a little more than halfway out towards the tip of the nose. The most amazing thing about doing any portrait is you can make an error that's like a 1/16 of an inch, and you're going to lose your likeness completely. So there's literally nothing else in the world besides the human face where your brain is going to be able to pick up an error like that. And that's why it's so useful to learn how to do. So the contour of Judah's nose is not absolutely straight. Every nose is built out of different sections of cartilage, and here we're going to see a slight rise right here, and then it's going to go down again, and then it rises out again towards the tip. Don't exaggerate those rises. They're very, very subtle. And most people confuse, okay, when you were in elementary school, if you think back to elementary school, you colored in the lips with your red crayon. So you got used to thinking about lips in terms of what's called local color, like where does the red end? Notice here, this shadow goes way up above where the red ends, and then here it comes down below where the red ends. And the important boundary is not where the red ends, it's where this light ends. So this shadow comes up higher, and we don't really need to worry about the color at all. If you want, you can just barely indicate where the red ends up there, but we're interested in where the light ends. That's the important boundary on a mouth. And I heard someone talking about, like, mine doesn't look like Judah. Well, don't try to assess it yet, because it doesn't have an eye. If Judah was super famous and he was walking around town, he didn't want anyone to recognize him, what would he do? Put on sunglasses, right. So you really can't recognize somebody very well until the eyes are there. And it's also, because of that, it's a mistake to, you don't want to edit your work too much yet. Okay, so we have this shallow, a very shallow indent under the brow ridge. And that gives Judah a very classical profile with kind of deep set eyes. You see the distance between here and the front of his eye is pretty far. And probably the best way to estimate that would be to pull a plumb line up from the back of his nose, and the eye has to be behind that line. So let's do that. Let's put a line going up, and then we're going to pop the eye in below the indent and behind this line. So that's going to be about here. And I'm going to test that just by putting a little bit of dark there and a little bit of dark above it. And I'm going to ask myself if that looks like it's the right placement. I guess I'm going to go ahead and put this shadow in too. And does that look like the eye's not too far back or too far forward? Yeah, I think it's all right. So try to adjust your eye placement until you're satisfied, and then you can go and do things like the eyelid, which, remember, has to come out past the front of his eye, and the pupil, the lower lid. Do the lower lid with a very, very light touch, and a little bit of this plane change here and here. A lot of people have that coloring book mindset, and they don't want to shade the white of the eye because they think it has to stay white. But the white of his eye right now is in shadow, so we can shade it slightly. And then I can shade this. There's often a dark shadow right here. It's like that's the shadow of the eye socket. And then the eyebrow is coming out sort of much wider than I've drawn it so far. So I'm going to block in the form of the eyebrow and then do a first shading. And then a little bit of second shading on the shadow side of the eyebrow. I'm going to go in dark with some little hairs. Okay. So right now I'm feeling like I'm going to take one measurement right now. You can watch me do this. I'm measuring the bottom of the chin to the bottom of the eye, and then I'm going from the bottom of the eye to the back of the ear. Those measurements should be about the same. So bottom of the chin to the bottom of the eye, and then bottom of the eye to the back of the ear. That puts the back of my ear about here. And what I just am noticing is this feels a little crowded between the corner of the mouth and the earlobe. You feel that? So the ear, I'm just going to shift it back a little bit to about here. You might, if you're copying me carefully, you might need to do the same thing. And that's, again, the advantage of the fact that we didn't do any ear details yet. So it's easy to move that earlobe without erasing a lot of careful work. Okay. Now, the reason we spent so long trying to learn how to shade spheres is so we know how to approach shading on something like this. So notice we're going to treat this like a sphere. We're going to shade across this edge. We already shadow mapped it, so we kind of know where the light ends. And we're going to shade this all as a rounded form. And do you think human faces show reflected light ever? They do. There's always reflected light. In fact, interesting trivia. Have you ever gone to a museum and seen the paintings of the people with the giant white collars around their necks? They look like clowns. No? Those are called ruffs. Well, I'll show you later. The reason artists liked to paint people with giant white collars is because the collar would throw a lot of reflected light under the chin. Judah's clothing is not giving as much reflected light, but you see how clear that is? And that beautiful reflected light is what's going to make his jaw look like it's turning under. So we're going to do a little darker first shading on either side of the reflected light. And then I'm going to switch to some rounded shading around that neck. And that reflected light along the jawline is what's going to make the form look like it's turning under. It's very hard to make anything look round without reflected light. And as I've probably mentioned already, that's why when you look at the moon in the night sky, it really doesn't look very round usually, even though it has a beautiful single light source, but it doesn't look very round because there's no reflected light on the moon. There's no surface to reflect it from. Okay, and I feel like there's the Adam's apple, and then his neck comes down quite a bit further. I drew the collar too high before. And let's zoom out again. I'm still reluctant to try to assess my work very much. I want to block in the hair a little more with a little more definition. So I'm going to start by making a kind of jagged outline. One of the most common questions my students ask me is two common questions. One is, how do you draw the foliage of trees? And another one is, how do you draw hair? And the reason those questions come up so often is because the answer is, in both cases, is really that you can't. Like, you can't draw every leaf, you can't draw every hair. So what you have to do in both cases is learn a kind of shorthand, and there are really a lot of different approaches that have been successful that other artists have developed. And what you want to do is just look at how other artists draw trees and how other artists draw hair and copy techniques that you like. Because it's always going to be an abstraction. Like no one's going to sit down and draw like, well, I shouldn't say no one because you know what Dylan would do. Dylan would draw every hair. That's what he's most proud of. But we don't, that's not how we draw. So here's one thing though that I want to really emphasize, which is that Judah's head is at the basically a ball, right? And so it's got a shadow edge that comes up along here, and then it continues to here, and then it continues along here. Here's what most people are going to miss is that this whole region here, basically here, is darker than this whole region here. You follow me? Do you believe me? So what we want to do is do a darker first shading in this whole region. We're not drawing individual hairs. We are simplifying this. But notice I made this kind of random flame-like pattern along the shadow edge because we're not drawing a smooth ball. We're drawing a very rough, irregular ball. And that's going to cause us to, it's gonna break up that shadow edge. So by doing this, now we've given the overall head a strong feeling of having a volume. If that makes any sense, we can actually read. Most people, again, it's a coloring book attitude. It's like, oh, what color is Judah's hair? Brown? I'll get my brown crayon and I'll color it in brown. But what we're seeing is a wide range of values, and that's what we care about drawing, not color, but value. Now, because the form is so regular, there's going to be a few spots on this side that pick up a little bit of light. So I can use my eraser and kind of like bring out some of those. And then there's going to be a bunch of areas on this side that are in shadow. I'm not trying to copy them individually. I'm just sort of like going for the vibe of what I'm seeing here. And this is where I'm pressing harder, and this is where I'm allowing my pencil to follow the basic direction that the hair is growing. Now, every beginner wants to just draw the hairs one at a time. So they'll draw like the cranium, and then they'll like just start putting hair in like that. And that doesn't look like hair, right? That looks like bad hair transplants, right? Or like a sad little doll's head. So never draw hair like that. Always think of it in terms of volumes There's little curls that are like combining and forming clumps, and each clump casts a shadow on the clump next to it, and it's incredibly complicated, and we're just trying to go for get a general sense. Now, inside the shadow shape, we're going to have some dark accents. They kind of got washed out in this photograph. Let's see if we can even see them. Yeah, if this wasn't a photograph, your eye would reveal more detail in here than the camera has, but what we want to do is just sort of bring out some darker. We're going to repeat those flame shapes, but a little darker on this side, and make it, and that's going to help bring this side of the head into a really complete shadow. So the final step in any drawing for me is I kind of step back and I ask myself the same question we asked at the very beginning, which is like, is the pattern of overall darks the same in my drawing as it is in the motif, which is the photograph? And what I'm seeing is that I'm seeing small differences in the pattern. I'm seeing that maybe Judah's eyeball is just a tiny bit more forward. See how easy that correction is to make? I'm seeing that this shadow on the back of his neck comes down a little lower and is a little darker. There's really no reflected light getting back here. Collar comes up a little higher in the back. And you're just looking back and forth and assessing the overall pattern. There's a little more dark under the earlobe. A little more dark at where the jaw turns. This is the core shadow of the plane change of the jaw, so that's going to be quite dark. And never stop looking at the motif. And the more you look back and forth, especially if you're working at the easel and your drawing's right up there next to the photograph, you can stand back, compare, and adjust. Nobody does it perfectly the first time, except Dylan. And so everyone else has to learn how to make corrections. You can draw like Dylan and get everything mechanically correct without making corrections, but that's really not what I'm teaching here. For anybody watching on YouTube who doesn't know who I'm talking about, I'm talking about Facebook Reels by a very talented artist whose handle is Drawings by Dylan, who I find to be objectionably photorealistic. I'm going to emphasize, see these darks where the hair is curling under above his eyes. And there's also a little bit of, the hair is casting a shadow onto his forehead along here, so that's something else that would help convey a sense. This is a really dark core shadow at the tip of the nose. I'm going to go a little darker on the core shadow of the ala. And a little darker on this And even as much as I tried to block in the hair correctly, it goes a little higher and a little further out and back. It's got these stray hairs that are part of the look here. So let's add some of those. You don't want the hair to look like a helmet or a hat. Or like my hair today because I wore a hat this morning. And I'm going to go one more time back here just to darken the back of the head. And that's going to help the whole volume to read a little better. I'm just using one number 2 pencil today. You know, when you get into more advanced drawing, you might want to experiment with using a slightly softer pencil for some of these details, the darker details. Okay, I'm going to just pause this again for a minute. Okay, we have a special treat for my viewers at home today. We're going to see all the drawings from my Intro to Drawing class here at Lime Old Lime High School. And these are first-year students studying with me just for a couple of months so far. And we are going to look at all the drawings that they did. And they're really a very strong group of drawings. So we've already done a lot of perspective work, and we've done a lot of work on shading techniques, and all their hard work is really paying off. So one thing you want to look out for, this is something okay, there's 2 little things to look out for here. I'm not mentioning the artist's name. We've got a little bit too much curve here, which is creating a little bit of a fish lip effect. More importantly, though, this pupil is advancing out past the eyelid. Do you see that? So it's giving a slightly bug-eyed look. Yep, this is a self-portrait by the artist, by the model of today. And Judah, you're going to have to draw yourself independently later on, and so you'll be able to compare how you do later to this one. I bet you're going to do better because this is your first one. That's good. And here's Will. Wanted everyone to see his name. He should be proud. That's a great drawing, Will. And there's Vivian. Very nice. And Charlie. Awesome. Okay. Thank you all for watching at home. Remember to like and subscribe and leave comments. Appreciate your time, and I'd love to see your drawings.